Assalamu alaikum. So we'll get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, and to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, and to call unto guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. So it's really a blessing to be with you all. Thank you guys for coming on a hot SoCal day, evening, I should say. And subhanAllah, I was just reminded before coming to class today of something that I'm really, really grateful for is, I've had the blessing and opportunity here at the Majlis to teach, for us to do Qur'an together for a number of years. And every now and again, I get the thought of like, well, what, like I could change the subject. I could, when I finish this juz, I can go on to there's 1,000 topics, right? So, and then subhanAllah, before I came today to class, one of our teachers, one of our shuyukh, I realized was in touch with my husband, and he congratulated us on the new space, alhamdulillah. And then he said, if his teacher was alive today, he would have said that in our times, we need to focus on Qur'an and salawat. And so I was like, subhanAllah, like, alhamdulillah, that it's just every single time I've had a thought, maybe just go and do something different or start a new book or start a new subject. I'm reminded of how much of actually it's truly a blessing to be able to continue to do tafsir. And alhamdulillah, here we're doing tafsir Juz Amma for the second time at the Majlis. The first time it wasn't really recorded. So this is also really, it's a blessing to go through it again. And even as I was looking through my old notes, and looking at things that I just didn't present on the last time we did Surah al-Mutaffifīn together, and now looking at it this many years later, alhamdulillah, doing it again and saying, no, actually our community, if I were to present on these aspects of the tafsir, our community would understand it. But maybe in 2019, we weren't necessarily as literate then to understand the concepts that inshallah I'll get to talk about a little bit today. And alhamdulillah, so we're very, very grateful. And as usual, before we go into the subject matter of the tafsir for today, how was the assignment for last week for you guys? Yes.
It was good, just a reflection. So I tried it with prayer specifically, and one thing that I noticed was that the struggle was still hard, but my motivation to actually try instead of not trying at all was better by trying into Surah al-Mutaffifīn. So like the 4 steps we mentioned for the Salah, like how to put your in Salah, like it was still really, really hard. But I guess I realized that when I'm not doing that, like when I'm like, it takes a lot of effort to actually try and implement those 4 steps.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. But there are times when I'm either lazy or tired or like in a public place where there's other things going on. Yeah. And I'll have this thought that's like, oh, let me quickly pray. Yeah. And I don't realize like the gravity of it. But now that we connected it to this, every time I had that thought where I was like, let me quickly pray. One, I thought of you, Shaykha, the taxi driver being like, and 2, it helped me understand the gravity of like by saying this, I'm implicitly like shortchanging Allah, subhanAllah, and like just how heavy that is. Just helped me understand that a little bit better and be like, how shameful is it to shortchange the one who loves you more than anyone else and is really sustaining me at all times. So essentially the struggle was still there, but anytime I had those thoughts like, oh, let me quickly pray or whatnot, it just like thinking of that helped me to still try my best.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, that's beautiful. That is really beautiful. Barakallahu fiki, alhamdulillah. That's, that's an assignment well done. MashaAllah. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Is there anyone else who would want to share? And for those who might be new today, welcome. It's nice to always have new faces for us at the Majlis. So I hope you guys enjoyed class today. We have tea and coffee, I think, in the back and some snacks. So please feel free, inshallah. For those who, is there anyone else who had reflections on the assignment for last week? Yes.
Similar, with the prayers as well, kind of like really thinking deeper, and I don't want to shortchange myself because I'm praying, kind of like for myself. Allah doesn't really need my prayers, and I think that's the thought that came up to me as well as the visual with the taxi driver.
The post-recording taxi driver story stayed. For those of you who are only watching online, that's the.
I know.
Yeah.
I have to be here. It's really about like thinking deeper into the salah.
Yeah.
And it made it easier. It's like, don't shortchange, whenever I'm like, oh my God, I just like did this fast.
Yeah.
I also thought about like, you said, how when you're, kind of like when you're done with a certain kind of like, I guess, ruku or sujood or whatever. It's like when you feel like, well, okay, you're done, you're relaxed. That's how it took its time. So I also was trying to mentally keep a note of that, but I'm not just doing that and getting up and, so I'm like taking my time and feeling the kind of like the blessing, the meditation of the prayer.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. That is really, really beautiful. Barakallahu fiki, mashallah. Alhamdulillah, I'm so glad to hear these reflections. And they're wonderful reminders. I mean, for those who are watching online, alhamdulillah, we had two beautiful reflections from sisters who mentioned that this was, once the intention came to not shortchange the prayer, it actually helped with the motivation. It was still like, the steps for khushu are still, they take time and they take effort, but the motivation to just not, to not take it for granted really was stronger because of tying it to this idea of Surah al-Mutaffifīn. So alhamdulillah, that's wonderful. Any other thoughts from anyone? Oh, yes.
Wasn't here, so I missed this when we were talking about this, but for me, it was just a reminder to slow down because we're so used to think, this is what you're saying, we just go so fast we're used to doing. So just to be more mindful, and then when having the sunnah, it helped. It actually, I realized, didn't take that much time.
Yes.
It's just 2 minutes, but it also helped me really focus. So there were good days, and then there were some days that I didn't really help bad, but there was a consciousness that was created. So
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Barakallahu fikum. So this assignment actually ties into the allegorical commentary on the same verses. So I'm going to pull up the verses now. Try that one more time. Okay. So in these, we covered the first 17 verses last time. I'm going to quickly read the translation of the verses, and then we're going to look at what Imam Ibn Ajiba said in the allegorical commentary. And then today, hopefully, we'll do verses 18 through 26 in the tafsir. So, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Woe to the defrauders, those who take full measure when they buy from people, but give less when they measure or weigh for buyers. Do such people not think that they will be resurrected for a tremendous day, the day all people will stand before the Lord of all worlds? But no, the wicked are certainly bound for Sijjin in the depths of hell. And what will make you realize what Sijjin is? A fate already sealed. Woe on that day to the deniers, those who deny judgment day. None would deny it except every evil-doing transgressor. Whenever our revelations are recited to them, they say ancient fables. But no, in fact, their hearts have been stained by all the evil they used to commit. Undoubtedly, they will be sealed off from their Lord on that day. Moreover, they will surely burn in hell, and then be told, this is what you used to deny. These are some severe verses. And we talked about the reasons that these verses were so, the warning is so grave in these verses. And, subhanAllah, how we started talking about this surah on the day that actually Imam Marcellus was unjustly killed. And, the scales of justice work for, it's very similar. You have a scale of justice, and if you come from a certain background, it will apply to you. And if you come from a different background in this country, many times it does not apply to you. And we pray that Imam Marcellus is accepted as from the Shuhada, because he maintained his innocence from the beginning to the very end. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept him into the highest reaches of paradise. But it was interesting that we're talking about Mutaffifīn, like this surah, in such a moment where you can see like the double standard so clearly in the justice system here, or the lack of a justice system here in America. So in the allegorical commentary, Imam Ibn Ajiba, and again, this is not tafsir, this is ishara. So in his work, he talks about like lessons that we can take as Muslims from the verses, that's not the actual commentary of the verses. These are, again, you're taking the verses as metaphor and allegory to point to other things. So he mentions that tatfif, and this is why it's really connected to our assignment. He says tatfif can be in our actions and our spiritual states, our ahwal, just as it can be in wealth. In our actions, he mentions that it's adm itqanihi shar'an. So that's the lack of like fully completing something according to the Sharia, right? And the lack of its completion, or the lack of its precision, or the lack of its mastery. But it's not just like shortcoming as in, because shortchanging and shortcoming are two different things. A shortchanging is a deliberate thing, like I'm just not going to do it. Whereas a shortcoming is you intend to do it and you fall short, right? So it's not the same. And so Abdullah bin Mas'ud radhiyallahu anhu, he mentioned that the salah is a mikyad. It's a weight, or it's a measurement. And so whoever is faithful to it, then it is faithful to them. The salah itself is faithful to you when you are faithful to it. And whoever does tatfif, and then he says, then you know what Allah has said about the mutaffifin. So again, this is intentionally, like I'm intentionally not going to fulfill this prayer. I'm intentionally going to do it negligently. And people may not always even be self-aware of when the intention changes, right? A person stands up to pray, and maybe they think of something, they're reminded, of course, because shaitan comes then and reminds them of 1,000 things they need to do. So the person in that moment might think, I'm just going to quickly get this done so I can go do that. And when they're done, they don't know how many rak'ahs they prayed. They don't know if they prayed the actual, like what prayer did I do later on in the day? They're like, did I even pray? Because it was done in such a state of like, not just absent-mindedness again, because there's an intention when a person says, or to themselves in their prayer, just like finish it up and go do the next thing. And it's not really thinking about the fulfillment of the obligation to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, whoever does not fulfill their deed in action and presence. So here he says, it's not just to fulfill the outward, he says also hudur, right? Whoever doesn't fulfill the deed with the outward form and the inward presence deliberately. Okay, so that's again the person who says, they like don't pray like the way a chicken pecks, right? The food. Then they were mutaffif in it. They were from the mutaffifin in their prayer. Now, it's not, this is an allegory. So again, we're not saying the verses that we just covered are addressing the person who is doing this in their salah. We're saying from the verses that say this is how bad it is when you defraud people when it comes to wealth, let us take a lesson spiritually from it and say, let us not defraud ourselves or defraud or like shortchange, what we're offering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to our own prayers. Because it's that intentional negligence that is the thing in common that's being looked at. Or I wouldn't even call it negligence, it's an intentional shortchanging. He mentions that tatfif in states, and these are in the ahwal, is in not purifying one's intention in it. So a person, alhamdulillah, we've talked about it before at Majlis, but like we can experience different spiritual states. And every spiritual state has something to offer us. Like qabd and constriction has something to offer us, and expansion has something to offer us, right? So moments of great presence and hudur, let's say, have something to offer us. And similarly, moments when a person feels the opposite of that, even that moment, that hal has something to offer us. And what he says is, in the ahwal, the person does tatfif when they don't purify their intention in it. So again, we've talked about it before, but like in times of challenging and constriction, because of how much we need God, many times it's actually very easy to purify our intention in those times, because it's like we need Allah so much in tribulation that how can the intention be anything other than Him, right? And in expansion, a person can fall into delusion and they don't even remember intention. So this is one of the things he mentions. And he says, or they are removed. And again, and I think this is really important for us in our time. He says they are removed from the manhaj of the Sharia. They're removed from the methodology or the approach of the Sharia. And can people feel something? Okay, they can have a state. And a hal is something that changes, it's not a station. So can people experience something or feel something in which, because of how they feel, they can fall short of the law of the Sharia itself. I think so, yes. And this can happen obviously in good situations and beautiful experiences, and it can also happen in difficult experiences. So as an example of a beautiful experience, a person can have an experience of mahabba, like they just feel the love for God so much. And in a deluded state, they might be like, you know what? Like I am the rules, again, this is delusion. Because I love God so much, I no longer need to pray 5 times a day. He knows how much I love him. And I've sadly, like when I was in high school, I used to actually hear people say this, and saying like, God doesn't need me to pray to him for him to know that I love him. I love him, and I know I love him, and I don't need to pray to show that to him, right? So someone is feeling something that might be really good, like they actually do feel love for God, but then they fell outside of the manhaj of the Sharia. Does that make sense? And this can also happen in a number of different things. I think it tends to happen at weddings, personally, because I feel like at weddings, people are genuinely happy and they're celebrating a joyous occasion, and especially in our time when it's like such a time of crisis as it relates to just helping people get married, that we're so happy that when people get married. But it feels like that's the one day where nobody cares about the law. Like the Sharia, what Sharia? Sharia is like tomorrow or after the wedding's over. Then we'll talk about the law again. But in these 4 hours, we're just happy. Just let us be happy. Let us do our happiness our way. And then we'll talk about it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So these are like, I think this is really significant because the fact that he's bringing this up in the allegorical commentary, not even in the tafsir, but in the allegorical commentary. Many times people think that the allegorical commentary of Ibn Ajiba, may Allah, accept from him, he is like the fluffy stuff, the metaphysical things that you might get on cloud 9 and you can just keep going, and it doesn't really connect to reality. But he's very clearly saying that to get into or to have even greater states of proximity to God and spiritual experience, like the do's and don'ts do matter. They should matter. And it doesn't mean that if you're not perfect, you're not on the path, but the intention to, I'm gonna try to do more, I'm gonna try to fulfill more, I'm gonna try to fulfill more, like the Sharia should never be absent from the spiritual path, otherwise it's not a spiritual path. And as an example of that, in our times, most like outside of Islam, New Age spirituality, and even the fads of mental health, some of the mental health, it's not even real mental health, because I know clinicians who are like, that people are making us look bad because they're popularizing concepts and terms that we as clinicians know this is not the way it works. So there's the popular fads are mostly geared towards people feeling that if they feel good, then they must be good. Does that make sense? If you feel good, then you're good. So let's get everyone to feel good. So their concepts of spirituality are really focused on feeling good, not observing any kind of law, not doing like even obedience is not part of that at all, this concept of obeying God. So this is, I think the fact that he brings it up so poignantly on this subject is important for us to reflect on. Imam al-Qushayri, he says that the Tatwif points to those who are short in obedience, like they shortchange Allah in obedience and worship, while they're asking for the full like reward of the people who are not doing that. And so like I want Allah to give me what he gives his most like closest servants, but I'm not gonna do anything close to what they do. And I'm going to fall, and I'm going to like not do what I'm supposed to do. So he says, while asking for the full compassion and mercy, and he says these are people who they experience in their life, they're fulfilled by Allah in the measurement of their own rizq, of their own sustenance to completion, but give him in return, again, intentionally, a deficient measurement of obedience with loss. And he says this is the greatest loss, is when people will see like what the rewards are for those who struggled and strived, and tried. And to try and fall short is actually intentionally try, and to fall short is a blessing, and it's there's tremendous reward in it. But to intend not to try, there's tremendous loss in it. Right. And he says that on the day of judgment, they're going to see, this is the greatest loss. People will see what they get compared to those who struggled and strived. And then he says, especially as compared to the knowers of Allah. But think about the mutaffif who intentionally doesn't try. And he does, let's say, outwardly, like 75%. Does that make sense? Outwardly. Inwardly, maybe he has 10% or not much, right? But it doesn't take much more time, and it doesn't take much more effort to actually go like in terms of worldly time and worldly effort to move from that to let me try my best in this thing, that I'm offering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why he's saying it's the greatest loss, because like you sacrificed a lot in the afterlife for just a little bit of effort in this life, right? A little bit of intentionality. And then the Kitab al-Fujjar, that's in Sijjin, which let me get there. كلا إن كتاب الفجار لفي سجين. He says this, the Prophet Muhammad there's a narration where the Prophet Muhammad said, the felicitous is the one who was so in his mother's stomach or womb, and the shaqi or the wretched is the one who was so in his mother's womb. And what's being referred to here is this idea of the knowledge of our choices actually being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before we ever came into existence. But again, it is our choices, but the knowledge of it is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from before we were even born. For wailul lil mukaththibin, he says, wail or woe to those who deny the truth, and also those who deny those who call and direct to it. So it's one thing to be in denial of something. It's another thing that when someone is coming to call people and say, look, here's the truth, they'll deny the messenger. They'll deny the caller. And this is again, it's a loss. And we need people who can be inviting callers, inshallah, to the way of Allah, so that it becomes harder for people to not listen. But there's also that reminder that like this is it in the end, it's the one who's chooses the state of denial that's in a state of loss. الَّذِينَ يُكَذِّبُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ. Here Imam Ibn Ajib talks about this category of people, the ones who reject the accounting on the Day of Judgment. Many times people will recognize even the Day of Judgment exists, but they live in a state of denial as if it doesn't exist. So a person can be Muslim, and without mentioning names, we have plenty of tyrants in the Muslim world, and they might even pray 5 times a day, but they're tyrants. And to live as a tyrant is to think in some capacity that you will not be held accountable for this kind of oppression. So he says, and that's one clear example, but on a lesser degree, this idea that, the Day of Judgment is a long time away, and it's not coming now, it's not coming tomorrow, so let me just live my life and I'll think about that when I get old, for example. We know for a fact that we don't know if we don't guarantee our life. We know for a fact that we don't know if we're going to live to old age. And yet in that is a form of denial as well. And so he says that people who do this, they're ahlun nufus, they're the people of the ego. And they are that way because rather than facing God with their heart, they're facing the worldly life with their whole selves. Like this is where they're looking. They're looking down at this world, and they're looking down at the next day and the next day, and it's just this life. And he said with their whole selves. And again, we as believers or as Muslims, inshallah, may Allah accept us as believers, we want to be people who have do the things that are good for our deen and our dunya, right? But not sacrifice eternal life for the temporary fleeting things that appear to be good in this life. وَمَا يُكَذِّبُ بِهِ إِلَّا كُلُّ مُعْتَدٍ أَثِيمٍ. The mu'tad, here he makes an allegory for this, and he says these are those who overstep. He says manners, they overstep like basic manners. That he says like the people like dhawq is to taste something. So it's an indication that they overstep dhawq. Is like almost like they sidestep it. Like when something leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Right, we talk about that. They behave in a way that constantly goes against like our better judgment, our better tastes. And then he says, and also their conscience. The mu'tad athim is the one who oversteps their own conscience. And so it's interesting in terms of the assignment that we had, this idea of having intention, right? We need to have the intention in whatever hal we're in. Like literally you can have the worst state and intend to experience that state, whatever state that is, in a way that's pleasing to God. And I don't want to overstep the Sharia. I don't want to shortchange my religion. And similarly, when it comes to the rules and engagement in this life, that my conscience is telling me I shouldn't do that, right? If something tells me like that's like just not good taste to behave that way, right? That's not good manners. Resorting and listening to that voice is really, really important. And he says people who do this regularly, they overstep the voice of their conscience. They overstep the voice of like their judgment, their better judgment in terms of good manners and good behavior. They become, he says, mahroom from deeper witnessing and unveilings. So I think when people think about like manners in general, because manners can fluctuate in every culture, in every society, there's different cultures, right? And something that may be normal in one culture is considered like bad manners in another. But still, this idea of dhawq, I think, is important because it's like, it's something that's not necessarily environmental, it's coming from inside the person, right? Like they're saying, maybe don't do that, or, again, it's that voice of the conscience. When people accustom themselves to bad manners and and I've heard this because anyone who works in Islamic schools or works with young people, we hear this all the time. they're like, what? It's not haram. It's not haram. It's not haram. It's not haram for me to. And it's like the biggest discussion amongst young people is when it comes to certain things is it haram to do X, Y, Z? And I'm like, why is the question always, is it haram? Like, why did you, I would love the question to be, is it good for my soul to do good, the X, Y, Z? Is it good for me? Is this something that I would get rewarded for? But it's usually like lowest common denominator, right? So one of the aspects about like habituating the self on bad manners, habituating the self on going against what your conscience is telling you, is that this is a person, because you've like blocked yourself off from your heart, like you've literally created a veil so you don't get to experience deeper states of spiritual witnessing and unveilings. This is what Imam Ibn Ajib is mentioning. He says, if the signs of the spiritual path to God are described, then they say tales of the ancients. So this is also something that unfortunately, like I think can be in the times we live in, is that when we think about the idea of a path to God, a spiritual path to God, which is there in Hadith Jibreel, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as though you see him, even though you don't see him, knowing that he sees you, that's a very high station for someone to be able to worship God from that place. It's not a fleeting moment. It's not it can be like a person can feel like a moment of that, maybe in salah or something. But what's being described is someone who actually does this, like this is the way they live. So there's an indication that people like this exist from the narration itself. There are people on this earth who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as though they can see him, and even though they don't see him, they worship him knowing that he sees them. To know that that's a reality, that's not some like description of only the prophets. That's a reality of ihsan, to know that that actually does exist, and there's a way to grow in our relationship with Allah to get closer and closer to that reality. There are people who would reject that altogether. And so he's saying that if you were to say that, no, there's actually a way. We have scholars of spirituality, just like we have scholars of theology, just like we have scholars of the law. And they, for centuries, have actually repeated the same things. That the manhaj hasn't changed, Some of the historical contexts have changed, but the basics are there, and they have always actually been there. For many people, unfortunately, they will be in a state of denial and say, and with the attitude of tales of the ancients. No, that was just for the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. That was just for the early generations. There's no way people in our time can be like that. Okay, granted, the best generation was the generation of the Sahaba, right? There's no doubt about that as a generation. But can there be individuals in our time and in future times that in their merit and in their proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are like the Sahaba? Many of the scholars, again, of spirituality would say absolutely. And that these were often people who revived the deen of Islam in their times. The Prophet, there's a sound hadith at the beginning of every century, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a mujaddid. So that means until the day of judgment, there will be people who will revive this deen, and they will be in these elite ranks that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's saying, again, when it comes to, I digress, but he's saying that that there are people who deny, and they're in denial of when they're given signs and they're given the descriptions of the fact that there is a path to God, a spiritual path to God, that is part of the Sharia, that is part of Aqidah, it all works together. When they're told about this, they say tales of the ancients. This was for a time long time ago. This doesn't apply to us. And so that's a state of denial by which then they don't get to experience the things that they're denying. He mentions that in the verse كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, that the rust that is there has gotten matted onto their spiritual hearts is because of all of their denial. And so they relied, rather than relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they relied on their fortunes and they relied on their desires. So they then became veiled from witnessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life, like not obviously seeing, but the heart witnessing him in terms of worship, and veiled in the next two. And then he says, except for a few moments. So there's the fact that it says except for a few moments means there's more commentary that hasn't been said. Al-Hasan ibn al-Fadl, he says the way that they were veiled from the tawheed of Allah in this life, they will be veiled from seeing him in the next. Imam al-Wasiti, he said, in Jannah, the disbelievers, or sorry, in the next life, the disbelievers don't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. The believers will see him sometimes at appointed times, but the arifin, and these are again that high caliber of the believers, will actually see him all the time, and they will not be separated from him in the next life, just as their hearts were not separated from him in this life. In Imam Ghazali's Ihya al-Ulumuddin, he quotes him as saying that being veiled from God is sufficient in the next life, is a sufficient punishment. Like it's actually a full punishment for the rest of mankind to be able to witness God and to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for the disbelievers to not see him. They said kafa, like as in terms of it has its own adab, it's its own difficulty. And then he said, but on top of that, what's worse and more painful is, again, on top of that, they will be punished in hell. And here we're talking about people who denied the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever removes the rust, Imam Ibn Ajiba mentions, with dhikr and fikr, remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the contemplation of that, he says the lights of witnessing and the secrets of presence and will enter the heart until the heart witnesses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala both in this life and the next. And this is the category for the Aliyeen and the Muqarrabeen, which we're going to actually talk about when we do the tafsir for the verses today. Whoever says with their, sorry, let me just look at this. He says, whoever stays with their desires until they are overtaken and overwhelmed by them, then the heart completely gets covered and veiled in both worlds. And that's another category that he warns of. Like, do not let your desires completely overwhelm or create a full rust over the heart, because thinking, okay, I'm a Muslim, alhamdulillah, because that's, it's going to come up inshallah in our tafsir today, but we don't aim to be it's still a beautiful category. Ashabul Yameen is a beautiful category, right? So the people of the right hand are the people who go to Jannah, and they're maybe not from the highest of the people, like the highest levels of Jannah, but they still get to go to Jannah. And because of how vast the differences of the afterlife are, no one should ever aim to be in the lowest level of paradise. Okay, so no one should ever say, I just want to be that last person who gets flipped over the door and I'll be happy. Yes, of course, anyone who can skip punishment altogether. But that, like, let us not aim for that. When we know what the rewards of the highest levels are, and we know, and inshallah it's going to come today in today's tafsir, let us aim for so much higher. And he says that if a person allows their desires to overwhelm their heart, maybe they'll be forgiven. You know, maybe Allah will forgive them, and they had all this rust in their heart, but they were still believers. Maybe they'll still land in Ashabul Yameen, but don't aim for something like that when we can do so much more, inshallah. If you fall short, right? Yeah, there's a really important principle. Falling short is okay. Intending to fall short, like short changing, that's what we're not trying to do. Yeah. He says there's 5 kinds of rust on the heart. The first and most severe is kufr, is to disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to deny him completely. The second rust is disobedience, actually to do the acts of disobedience. The third is ghafla, is negligence. So it's, this is a normal thing for most people who are not from the highest levels, which is for the heart to not be in the remembrance of God. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing haram things. It just means that they are consumed or absorbed into something other than something that's for Allah. The fourth, and this is really interesting. I read this and I'm like, there's no commentary here, but we'll have to look at other books. The fourth kind of rust he mentions is sweetness from the acts of obedience. Now, why would sweetness from acts of obedience be a form of rust? It's acts of obedience and the sweets. It's not a, it's in, yeah. Mhm.
Just a thought, maybe it can tie back to what you said in the beginning about someone being so overcome with the love of Allah that they think they might be exempt from the Sharia.
It can definitely cause a person, it's very possible for someone to get delusional from what feels like a positive experience, yeah. But also, I was going to say, because when you hear the fifth one, then you're going to understand the fourth one maybe a little bit more. But to pray to worship Allah, because your intention is I want to worship Allah, is very different than to pray because you're trying to have that spiritual high or to enjoy sweetness, right? And if you're doing things because I'm looking for the sweetness, I'm looking for the sweetness. Where's the sweetness? I'm looking for the experience. I'm looking for the taste of this. And it's such a subtle shift. Most of the time when it happens, as someone who I know, I'm talking for myself, when this happens, we don't know it's happened when it's happened until it doesn't happen, until we find the disappointment of like, wait, I just did this and I didn't feel, and I'm like, did I do it for, was this about God or was this about the enjoyment of the act of worship? And so, subhanAllah. And the thing that I find really interesting, and this has happened repeatedly to me in my life, is maybe I'll do something one time, right? And there's a lot of whatever, enjoyed it so much. Then I'll go back to the same thing. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna enjoy it just as much. And I go and it's like not there. And I'm like, why is it not here? And then dejected and feeling rejected, I'll go and do something very simple that's not that, right? And that simple thing is actually about Allah. And it will be in the place that like I wasn't doing it. I'm doing this thing because like it's just something you're supposed to do, right? Like a basic, non-impressive nothing. You know what I mean? Like it's just a basic thing. Maybe it's a fard prayer. You know what I mean? But it's in that thing that I wasn't seeking the sweetness is when it would come. And so it's very similar to this concept of like if you're seeking, because the sweetness of the act of worship is actually, believe it or not, it's actually from the enjoyments of the things of this life. Okay, let me give you an example. You know how they say we worship Allah, we don't worship the spiritual high that we get from worshiping Allah, right? So it can, by the way, this so-called spiritual high, sometimes it's a nafsani high. We don't realize the difference. Like the nafsani high sometimes it's just a caffeine high. So for those of us who like to drink coffee. So this is why it's really important that we separate feeling good from being good. And that our path is really about being good. And sometimes we're going to feel good and sometimes we're not going to feel good. Sometimes you're going to feel great things, sometimes you're going to feel terrible. But if your intention, again, that intention that we're not going to try to shortchange is actually like, this is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being with him in whatever way pleases him, then you're safe. You're safe if you can hold on to that in expansion, and you're also safe if you can hold on to that in contraction. So when it comes to the sweetness of the acts of obedience, right, being a form of a veil. If you're intending sweetness, that's an enjoyment. That is an actual physiological enjoyment, right? Like it's a thing that you're looking for. And can I enjoy something without intending it? Yes. If that's not your intention, you can enjoy it. But if that's your intention, right, that's a lesser intention than and a much, I would say, like if you really put it there, it's a much lesser intention than I'm actually here because I want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he is worthy of worship. So that's one of them is about me and one of them is about him, right? So if, again, we're supposed to make Umrah for those of us who are coming with us, inshallah, in November. And everybody knows what Medina feels like. Everybody knows it's indescribable. And yet that cannot be our intention. It cannot be our intention. Yeah. Like there's a difference between I'm looking forward to Medina because it's Medina and everyone knows what's there in Medina. I'm just like looking forward to it. But like my actual going there, what's my reason for going there is to visit the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And but like try to imagine, for example, one of the reasons why I really love Mecca is because Mecca is not Medina. Like you can't a lot of it is not the same experience, right? In terms of, especially for people who have made Hajj. People who've made Hajj will tell you that like it is about God and it is about holding on to God while the crowd is pushing you, while your buses are late, while the food is rotten, while like everything kind of goes wrong. But because the anchor with the intention to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fulfill this pillar is so strong, people kind of transcend the difficulties, but it's not the ease and comfort and joy of Medina, right? So it is a reminder of what real life is like. I think the tawaf and Hajj in general and being in Mecca is a reminder of the norm. You know, you might find these moments and these pockets of relief and expansion or whatever it is, but then you go back into the storm, you know, but with a strong intention, alhamdulillah, inshallah, people actually come back feeling, not just feeling, but profoundly, you know, affected by that experience, despite all kinds of hardships they may witness. So I'd like, again, the sweetness of the acts of obedience is important, as in recognizing it as a kind of rest, because there are things that feel good, but they are less virtuous than other things that don't feel so good. Does that make sense? There's certain kinds of things, ibadats, that we can do, and we just enjoy them, right? And it's not wrong to enjoy them, but let's just say that there's something else that a person can do in that same time or that same space, and that's actually, and it's the one that feels the worst. Oftentimes, just so everyone knows, when you're in a situation and the way of ihsan is usually the hardest option. It's not the easiest one. It's the one you'd rather not take. You're like, no, I'm just gonna go with something that's mubah and allowed because it's allowed, you know. But the higher road is often the one that is a little bit more bitter, a lot more patience needed, a lot more controlling of the nafs and the ego, just all the things you don't want to do, but it is the higher road and it doesn't feel good at the time. Yes.
Sorry, just something that helps me think about this topic sometimes is like, sometimes I might give like a gift to somebody, and like if it's a really good gift, sometimes the person will be like, wow, this is amazing. And they'll just start talking about the gift that I gave them.
Yeah.
And it's like all that thought that I put into it, none of it is really like acknowledged, or like, you know, it's like it all just becomes about, and sometimes I'm just like, well, what if I didn't have the money to buy such a great gift? Like, would you still be as happy to like get something from me? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes like I'll just go to the dollar store or like, you know, do something really simple, but it's like it just really came from the heart. And people that I'm very close to, they'll just be like, I mean, they'll be very appreciative of the gift, but in that moment, it'll be an opportunity for both of us to be like, it's not really even about the gift. It's really about the relationship.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Barakallahu fikum. That's a really beautiful analogy. That people can get so lost in the gift that they forget about the giver. It's not even they you know, and it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's giving us what we, you know, all of these things. And then the fifth one he mentions, and this is why I said once you hear the fifth one, you'll probably understand the fourth one more. So the fourth one, he calls it one of the forms of rest on the heart. Why does he call it one of the forms of rest? Because this is the allegorical commentary. It's not a sin. We're talking about like kinds of veils from deeper witnessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So the last one, he puts it with comment, thankfully, because it's one that's hard to understand, which is hissul kainat, like the five senses of the things that exist. So I was like, okay, so that's a veil, you know, like that I can see, smell, touch. But he comments on it and he says that no one can actually be purified of these and taken to the station of the Aliyin, and he calls it actually the station of Al-Ayan, to be able to essentially transcend all of these categories, except if they have except by keeping the company of the Mashayikh al-Arifin. So he says there is no path of removing all of these different kinds of rust completely, except by keeping the company of the Mashayikh al-Arifin. So essentially keeping the company of those who've actually arrived at this level is how people can potentially, if they're meant to, inshallah, also arrive at this level. Does it mean that they don't have the five senses? No, they have the five senses, but they're not limited to their five senses. Okay, so this class is supposed to be over at 8. So, and it's 8, and we have not started tafsir, not one bit. Can we do some of the tafsir today? Just to get to the assignment, inshallah, and we always start a little bit late too. We start at 7:12-ish. So because of praying Maghrib. So maybe we'll go a little bit, inshallah. Okay, so for today, and these are really beautiful verses, actually. I hope I can do them justice. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كلا إن كتاب الأبرار لفي عليين وما أدراك ما عليون كتاب مرقوم يشهده المقربون إن الأبرار لفي نعيم على الأرائك ينظرون تعرف في وجوههم نضرة النعيم يسقون من رحيق مختوم ختامه مسك وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون ومزاجه من تسنيم عينا يشرب بها المقربون. This is what I had prepared, but we'll see how far we get. These are such beautiful verses. I don't mind if we spend two weeks on these verses, because these are nice verses to spend time on, inshallah. So Illiyun is an unusual plural whose singular form is disputed. And Imam Ibn Ajiba talks about this as well. He says that some say that one, and I'm trying to see how they translated it in the study of Qur'an. They didn't even translate it. Let me see how they translate. They don't translate it. They just leave it as al-liyun. Okay, that's actually a good thing. Why? Because to understand what's the meaning, there's a lot of tafsir or commentary on this. So it said that one of them is the word alli or alliya, and then again there's a difference. And some say that this is a place that's in the highest part of paradise. And it's a place where the muqarrabun live. And Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he said that this is a statement that's his. He says, "Inna ahla illiyin la yanzuruna ila ahli al-jannah min kawa, فإذا أشرف رجل أشرقت له الجنة وقالوا قد اطلع علينا رجل من أهل العليين." So again, let me translate this. Ibn Umar, he mentions that truly the people of the Aliyin, they look down or they look upon the people of paradise from above them. And if someone, receives this honor, if a man, it says rajul, but it could refer to male or female, receives this honor, then basically Jannah shines for them. and the people say, it's literally like a sunrise, like the way you say tulu ash-shams, right? Like the sun has risen, like this person's risen from amongst us, or risen upon us is a person from the people of the Aliyin. So if this person comes out, it's like they have sun rays. It's as if they have sun rays coming out of them. And that's how the other people in paradise kind of experience the people of Aliyin. There's another narration also. And this one is a tafsir, that's a hadith that's mentioned in the tafsir of al-Baghawi, where it says, truly a man from the people of the Illiyin is going to come out, or would come out, and he would look at basically his kingdom in paradise. And there will not be a tent from the tents. I didn't even know Jannah had tents, but it says khayma, a tent from the tents of paradise, except that the light of his face would have entered it until the people actually smell such a beautiful smell from him that they start to say, wow, what is this beautiful fragrance? What is this beautiful fragrance? So that's also a narration. It's mentioned in Tafsir Imam al-Baghawi. And there's another narration also that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that the Illiyun fi as-sama as-sabi'a tahta al-arsh. So that this is a category, this is a space that's right below the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now again, linguistically, it indicates high places or people who sit in high places, and those who dwell in the highest parts. In this life, it would be the people who would if it was ascribed to this life, it's people who live in on mountaintops. But here it refers to something exalted by many degrees. It's a contrast to what was said earlier about the Sijjin, which is the lowest part of hellfire. It's a crevice, like a pocket in hellfire. And unlike the Sijjin, this is a place that the people that receive that, their good deeds are recorded there. And also the Illiyun some have said that it is either in the seventh heaven below the divine throne, which we just mentioned, or beyond the seven heavens to the right of the throne, and that's mentioned in Tafsir Imam al-Qurtubi. It also indicates heights without limit, and some have said that it refers to the place where the lot tree of the boundary, where Sidratul Muntaha is. So again, this is in all of the opinions, whichever opinion a person takes, it's considered like the highest reaches of paradise. Most people will agree, most mufassirin, I should say, would agree that this verse describes the book of the righteous, where it says Kitabun Marqum, a fate already sealed, is actually their book that is sealed, and it indicates the writing of the deeds of the pious is actually in Illiyun, and that is a writing inscribed. Verse number 21, يَشْهَدُهُ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. Now some say al-muqarrabun refers to actually the angels. In Surah Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in verse 172, لن يستنكف المسيح أن يكون عبدا لله ولا الملائكة المقربون. Never would the Messiah disdain to be a servant of Allah, nor would the angels that are brought near to him. So the angels in this verse, it says they're literally described with the adjective al-muqarrabun, وَلَا الْمَلَائِكَةُ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. So it's describing the angels. The other opinion is that it refers to the sabiqun, in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, وَالسَّابِقُونَ السَّابِقُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ, the people who outstrip everyone else and they're racing to God with beautiful good deeds and inward states and all of those things. So they're that highest category of human worshiper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are the muqarrabun. And then there's a third opinion, which is actually, it's both those angels and the sabiqun, that because they're both actually of those who are brought near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's actually both of them. إِنَّ الْأَبْرَارَ لَفِي نَعِيمٍ. Surely the virtuous will be in bliss. Now, in other places in the Quran, it says that the muttaqeen are going to be in bliss. In other places, it says the people who believe and do righteous deeds are going to be in bliss. And we had a discussion already about the abrar and who are the abrar. Here he says ahlul yameen. So again, the people who the abrar are not necessarily of the same station as the muqarrabun. But even, again, ashabul yamin, they're going to be in bliss. The people of paradise, the righteous will be in bliss. And it says, "Ala al-ara'iki yanzurun." They're going to be sitting on couches, gazing around. And Imam Ibn Ajiba says they're going to be gazing around at the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with. And the couches also represent the state of the soul at peace. Now think about, subhanAllah, if you think about sitting on a couch, like what do you want to do when you want to be comforted, when you go home? Many times you find a cushion, a couch, something that's a nice place to sit, right? That's why we fill the masjid with couches. Now we can think about them differently, inshallah. But he says it represents actually the soul at peace that is content with God while God is content with it. And the pious, some say they're gazing at the delights that they're given in paradise in the garden. Again, that's what Imam Ibn Ajiba mentions. Others say they are this gaze that they have, yanzurun, is when they're looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And this is based on the verses that wujuhun yawma'idhin nadira ila rabbihim nadira. They're looking at God himself. So whether it's his blessings or looking upon him as we know that that's one of the blessings of the people of paradise, they get to look upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just didn't know that we'd be doing so potentially from a couch. تعرف في وجوههم نظرة النعيم. You will recognize on their faces the glow of delight. And what Imam Ibn Ajiba mentions about this is that every single person in paradise will have said to them that which contents them and delights them. Like every single ear will hear what it wanted to hear from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's not a single person who's going to be left out of hearing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the words of their Lord actually welcoming them. And this is and so you would see the look of delight from their faces because they're receiving that. This verse also can be read as, because it says ta'rifu, right? So ta'rifu is you, it's a you singular in the Arabic language. So one reading of this is that it's telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like you will see this, you, O Prophet Muhammad, will see this in Jannah from your ummah, from the believers. You're going to see that they will have this this glow of delight upon their faces. So that's one reading of it, is that it's directly to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the second reading of it is also that it could be to me, the listener, to the reader of the Quran, that you would know, inshallah, if we were in paradise, you would know, you would recognize them from the glow of delight upon their faces. Now this يُسْقَوْنَ مِنْ رَحِيقٍ مَخْتُومٍ, they will be given a drink of sealed pure wine. Now there is discussion on this pure sealed wine. I think maybe this is the part of discussion I can skip, but well, it's kind of related to the assignment, so I guess I can't skip it. We're not going to drink wine, in case anyone's wondering, but it is related to something. Those in paradise will drink the pure wine that is sanctioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it may be the same as the wine that's mentioned in Surah As-Safat, white, delicious to those who drink thereof. No drowsiness lies therein, nor are they intoxicated by it. And also in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, wherefrom they suffer neither headache nor intoxication. And in Surah Muhammad, some say that this pure wine is superior to actually the rivers that are mentioned that are going to be in paradise. وَأَنْهَارٌ مِنْ خَمْرٍ لَذَّةٍ لِلشَّارِبِينَ, rivers of wine that are referred in Surah Muhammad there. And the seal is khitamuhu misk. This is either an actual seal of musk, like the seal of what they will get is sealed with misk. This is mentioned in Tafsir of Imam al-Tabari, or it's the scent of musk, which appears like the person will drink the drink, and then as soon as they finish the drink, the scent of musk will appear at the end when the end of the wine is reached, as a form of sort of as an additional pleasure that the person will experience in paradise. Now, يسقون من رحيق مختوم. It's خالص لا شوب فيه. So it's pure and there's nothing mixed with it, right? And then ختامه مسك, we talked about that. Now the thing that's really interesting before we go on to the next verses, this is mentioned in the commentary, that this pure drink is not mixed with anything else, right? And let me read the Arabic. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. So this amazing drink, we're being told, so let whoever aspires to strive diligently for this. And you're like, of all the things to have in paradise, why do I want this pure drink? You know, like there's so many things. Like I want to be with the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I want to be with, you know, there's so many things. Like you can, you know, the company, obviously, to be in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I'll tell you why it says, for this, فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. He says this, it's saying like for, like Imam Ibn Ajiba mentions, فَلْيَرْغَبَ الرَّاغِبُونَ وَلْيَجْتَهِدَ الْمُجْتَهِدُونَ وَلْيَسْبِقْ الْمُسْتَبِقُونَ. So want this, strive for this, and race for this, okay? And this is something that is even the word that's used for فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ, the root of this is something that's actually rooted to nafs. It's something that the nafs wants, right? And so there's a competition in it, like it's something precious, it's something dear to someone. And it is somewhat understood in maybe the next two verses, and we'll get to it. And this drink's flavor will come from tasneem. وَمِزَاجُهُ مِن تَسْنِيمٍ عَيْنًا يَشْرَبُ بِهَا الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. Okay, so what is tasneem? Tasneem is something that is mixed. So tasneem, most commentators agree that tasneem is the purest and noblest drink of heaven. Some say it flows from the divine throne into paradise. Some say that it's a proper name with no specific meaning, but it's the proper name of that spring. And it derives from the verb, others say that it derives from the verb sannama, to raise, indicating that it raises or ennobles those who drink it. That's mentioned in the Tafsir Imam al-Razi. Ibn Abbas, he mentions that tasneem is what is alluded to in the Qur'an, that no soul knows what comfort is kept hidden for it as a recompense for that which they used to do. So again, some say that tasneem is a spring whose waters are mixed with pure wine that is sealed for the companions of the right, but from which those brought nigh drink in its purest form. Okay, pause here. So some people will have this drink in paradise that is completely pure, and some people will have that drink and it's mixed with other things, okay? It's mentioned here that the people in the highest levels, the muqarrabun, will drink this drink in its purest form because it's a reflection of their hearts in this world. It was pure for God. It didn't have any other entities in their hearts. It was based on the purification of their heart in this life is the measure of the purification of their drink in the next life. That's why فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. Is that like this is a really high station. To have it in its most pure form is the station of the muqarrabun. And apparently there is some delight in it. There's some meaning in it. There is some experience in it that is singled out in this surah, and also, you know, it's mentioned in other places as well, that this is something worth our attention and worth us trying to strive to be able to be of the people who get to experience this drink in its most pure form. Strive for that. And I think we can probably stop in just a second. I'll just end on there's something Ibn Ajiba says that's like really beautiful, and I want to make sure I don't not do it. Okay. So he says, skipping a lot, what he says is the muqarrabun, because they purified themselves for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there wasn't in their hearts with him anything else from this dunya, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifies for them their drink in the akhirah. and Ahlul Yameen, the people of the right hand, and they're also the Abrar, because of what was mixed in their heart with their love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then their drink in the next life is also, it has a mixture. So he says, فَمَنْ صَفَّى لَهُ صُفِيَ لَهُ وَمَنْ كَدِرَ كُدِرَ لَهُ. So whoever purified, for Allah, then Allah purifies their drink for them. And whoever like allowed other things to mix in with their heart, then they get a drink that has other things mixed in with it. Doesn't mean their drink is not delicious. It's delicious, but it's not the same as the people who get the pure drink. And there is more commentary. Maybe next week, if we have time, I'll go into it, inshallah. But the assignment, which I think, inshallah, is something that I want us to feel connected to what we just read, in a very real way, because it says فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. Like really strive for this. How many times in the Quran does Allah tell us to strive for something like this? And to bring it to ourselves in a meaningful way. And now, again, this is an assignment. You don't have to do the assignment. It was a creative assignment this time. Take it or leave it, inshallah. The creative assignment is to drink something that is pure, to actually make a drink. It could be tea, it could be coffee, it could be water, to drink a drink that is nothing else mixed in with it, of your choosing, while you're doing something that is purifying to your heart. So it could be you're making dhikr, it could be reading Qur'an, it could be forgiving people, it could be anything, any of the things that are actual purifiers to the heart. But while you're doing that, put a drink in front of you that is purely one thing. Don't mix anything else with it, as a reminder, just as a reminder of like, let people strive for this, right? It's not, obviously no drink of this life will compare to that, but just this idea of this pure thing that is precious as a reminder. And I would say if we're able to even do that in a time when we're tempted to actually do other things, right? Tempted to do something that has negligence in it, or to has just, like something that there is not necessarily like reward or benefit in, to set aside time in the day. Choose your drink, and it could be a different activity each time, but the intention is I'm having this drink and I'm going to do something that's purifying to my heart, because I want to be from the people who are willing to strive, inshallah, to be from this category that gets to drink the drink of the akhirah in its most pure form. One of my teachers, Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah, he mentioned, I was in a gathering and he asked me, he said, who's an alim? Who's an alim? And I was like, you are. Like, no. He said, no, who's an alim? Who's an alim? And I said, I don't know. And he said, the one who knows that the akhirah is better than this life. The one who and not just like when he says no, he doesn't mean like conceptually. He means the one who like lives like the akhirah is better than this life. And so we have to have, I think, like as a different teacher said, that if unless we put reminders for ourselves within our day of the true life to come, this life is naturally deceiving, right? It can really deceive us from eternity. And so that's one of the reasons why I really like the idea of this drink should not just be like, oh, that's one day. No, like daily put a drink that's as a reminder, as a symbol of a drink to come, a real drink to come. And with the prayer even that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to drink it in its most pure form. Yeah. I mean, but may Allah make us of the people who really, not just conceptually, but with our lives, live that the akhirah is better than this life, inshallah. We're going to close with dua because of timing. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه، واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء، وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى، علمنا ما ينفعنا، ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به، واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم، آمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما، وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما، لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us amongst your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us the success to act upon what you have taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven, not one of us wretched or deprived. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen.